Andor Season 2 is finished, and I didn't cover it on the channel because I didn't really have anything to say about it. Now that it's over, the most positive things I can say are the costumes and overall production design was on par with Season 1, the decency of the acting was also on par with Season 1, and the track, Past, Present, Future, that plays at the end of the show was good. I would give Season 1 a 6 out of 10, closer to a 5 than a 7, and Season 2 a 5 out of 10, closer to a 4 than a 6. Season 2 was less exciting, less compelling, and felt less necessary than the first season, if that's even possible. Both Andor and Luthen were seriously underutilized this season, and for the most part the rest of the characters weren't involved in any plot lines that I found particularly interesting. Overall, this show felt pointless, incredibly average, and the amount of praise the show has gotten from both sides of the fandom seems very overblown to me, leading to the show feeling overrated. This morally grey take on the rebellion feels pretentious, and the response to the show from both sides of the fandom does nothing but heighten the pretentiousness of the show and Tony Gilroy. To get a better look at the rebellion and the Empire in real Star Wars, I recommend reading the Dark Forces trilogy of novellas, following the character of Kyle Katarn, a character that Disney have taken a lot of aspects from for characters like Kanan Jarrus and even Andor. Disney taking from the EU to add to the Disney canon feels rather disrespectful and lazy, especially when it always ends up being a bastardized and lesser version of what they are essentially plagiarizing. A perfect example of that would be the Disney Thrawn. That version of the character is nothing but a shallow attempt at replicating the real Thrawn from the EU.
And there have been times when we wanted to use things from the EU and I was like, yeah, but we can't use it that way. So I don't want to use it and change it. I don't want to use it and make it something completely different. That's rude.
Back to Tony Gilroy, I find it hard to believe that he actually cares about adding to the mythos of Disney Star Wars, since the show has retconned the established Disney canon regarding Mon Mothma's speech given at the Senate and how Andor first meets K2SO, which takes place in a tie-in comic for Rogue One, and the latter taking place in Rebels. A competent and talented writer would not need to retcon these events in order to tell the story they want. They would work within the established continuity, not disregard the work of others for the sake of their own stories. This is not a problem exclusive to Tony Gilroy, as Filoni is one of the biggest perpetrators of this behavior, and as the chief creative officer, this blatant disregard for continuity clearly has an effect on how other creators treat the established Disney canon. Now, of course, the original 6 films contradicted some of the EU, but if anyone can dictate the canon of Star Wars, it's the man who created Star Wars. And I don't think there is a single person working at Disney Lucasfilm today who should have that same level of authority or power over the continuity, to have the ability to say that certain details are going to be overwritten for the sake of a new story. Some of you might want to bring Filoni up as someone who could have this authority, but not even he should be able to do this despite his constant disregard for other people's work. He was in charge of the Clone Wars, and from behind the scenes clips of the production and things said by Filoni himself about the production, the writing and creative decisions made by him, it's clear that the show was originally created under the pretense that it would fit within the established canon, and any retcons made by the show were made by Filoni himself, not George. It was not George Lucas dictating the canon with that show. Filoni decided to do that himself without George's knowledge. And one of the reasons he was able to do this and get away with it is because George was not as present in the production of the show as some people seem to think he was. He did not handpick Filoni to be his successor. Filoni was not some kind of apprentice to him, at least not in the eyes of Lucas himself. Essentially, Filoni betrayed the trust of George Lucas, betrayed everyone whose works he disregarded, and decided to dictate the canon of Star Wars to be how he wanted it to be. The Clone Wars couldn't fit into the established canon because of this, and that doesn't mean the EU is retconned by the show. In reality, it should mean the show is not part of real Star Wars, George Lucas Star Wars, which did in fact include the expanded universe. George is on video after he sold Star Wars to Disney, and after Disney decanonized the EU, stating that the original saga, his saga, was about Anakin, his children, and his grandchildren.
The original saga was about the father, the children, and the grandchildren. And that's not a secret to anybody. It's even in the novels and everything. But
those grandchildren exist only in the expanded universe, and that makes the expanded universe part of the original saga, a part of George Lucas' Star Wars. That's what makes it real Star Wars. The Clone Wars was not real Star Wars, and that's why it so easily fits within the Disney canon. It is on par and even worse than the majority of Disney's other Star Wars projects. and any story from the Clone Wars that you can recall being somewhat well written were most certainly not written by Filoni. This disregard for continuity by Filoni and other creatives at Lucasfilm has led the Disney expanded universe to become convoluted and an inconsistent mess. Disney argued the expanded universe was in a similar place as a reason for decanonizing the EU after they purchased Star Wars, so they could apparently streamline and clean up the canon, yet they have done the complete opposite. Continuity and canon matters. It should matter to you if you're a real fan. I care about Star Wars and it means a lot to me, and many others. It should be treated with some level of respect from the creatives. These movies, shows, novels, comics, and games are all forms of art, regardless of how seriously you personally take them or how much they mean to you. So if you feel the need to downplay the importance of what I'm talking about because Star Wars is just about space wizards or movies for kids or whatever other reason you want to use to devalue people's investment in it, you're just a dumb cunt. You're officially a dumb cunt. How does it feel? This lack of care about continuity and canon is what causes Disney Star Wars to not have the same staying power and real reverence of George Lucas Star Wars. This is one of the main reasons why Disney Star Wars does not work. Another reason why it doesn't work is because they are telling the wrong stories in the wrong mediums, on top of them telling stories that probably don't need to be told at all. If the people working at Disney Lucasfilm weren't such spineless cowards, they would have been spending the last decade expanding on the sequels and its characters. Stories that should have been told on screen, such as what Luke, Han, and Leia were doing between episodes 6 and 7, have been relegated to comics and novels nobody is reading, when these are things that should be on film, or at the very least in an animated series. Why make a comic about the origin of Kylo Ren when the majority of people are not going to read it? Why not tell such an important part of the Disney canon in a medium more accessible, like an animated series or a trilogy of films? These are stories that should have been the most important projects that received the most work and support. But instead, we get shows that are essentially pointless, such as The Mandalorian, Andor, The Acolyte, Kenobi, Boba Fett, and the Skeleton Crew. Regardless of how much you like these stories, they should not have been made before projects expanding on Disney's new characters and canon set up and established in the sequel trilogy. Disney have wasted whatever goodwill they may have still had with the general audience in the years since The Rise of Skywalker's release on worthless stories that only feel like they were made for the sake of selling subscriptions to Disney+. These shows do not feel like they're made with any real passion for Star Wars or storytelling, and it gives Disney Star Wars a feeling of soullessness. Regardless of what you think of George Lucas Star Wars, his passion for the story and vision for Star Wars is clear in his 6 films, and the soul of those films extends to the expanded universe because the creatives who worked on the EU had his same passion and vision for Star Wars. This is seriously lacking with Disney Lucasfilm. Their films, shows, novels, comics, and games do not feel like Star Wars because of this. They do not feel like they even matter because they don't matter. They are not real Star Wars and they never will be. At this point, the only hope for Disney to tell relevant stories that actually feel important or worth investing time into is to focus on expanding the sequels in meaningful ways, so their future projects don't feel so worthless. But that will most likely never happen, and Disney will continue to tell stories that don't need to be told and stories nobody will care about as soon as they're finished with them. Now, to end the video, I've decided to recommend some expanded universe material for you to check out if you're interested in exploring more of George Lucas Star Wars. Real Star Wars. First, the Purge comics, set right after the events of Order 66, where Vader starts hunting surviving Jedi. Then the Dark Times comic series, which overlaps slightly with Purge, but extends further in time as well, following characters affected by the fall of the Republic. Then you have the Empire comics, set just before and after the Battle of Yavin, focusing on the rebellion, imperial politics, and Vader. And then the Rebellion comics that continue from Empire. I mentioned earlier the Dark Forces novellas. These novellas are the canon telling of Kar-Katan's story from Dark Forces, similar to how the novel of Force Unleashed is the canon telling of that story. They do a lot to flesh out Kar-Katan's origin and his background, his character, and they also are consistent with other EU material. Next up are the X-Wing novels that follow the Starfighter Unit Rogue Squadron, which was founded by Luke Skywalker and then led by Wedge Antilles later on. The first several books take place shortly after the Return of the Jedi, while the Empire is still strong and the New Republic is trying to establish itself. This also has a spin-off series, Wraith Squadron, which is worth checking out as well. The Han Solo trilogy, which tells you the backstory of Han Solo. You see his childhood, the first time he meets Chewbacca, him earning his life debt, becoming involved with Jabba the Hutt, some of his early smuggling jobs, and this leads all the way up to A New Hope where he first meets Luke Skywalker. And if you want to see the relationship of Luke and Mara develop from when they first meet to when they get married, you can read the work of Timothy Zahn in the order of the Thrawn trilogy, the Hand of Thrawn duology, which ends with them getting married, and lastly Survivor's Quest. All of these have well-produced audiobooks as well. The audiobooks Disney released for the expanded universe will be the best Star Wars material they will ever have a hand in creating. These are just a few things I thought of recommending for people to check out, but there are so many other stories just as good and just as worth reading. All part of George Lucas's original saga and all made with the same passion for Star Wars that he had. And all of these stories I do hope to cover on the channel in the future. Long live George Lucas Star Wars. Thank you for watching, like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys later.